AI is not the boogeyman, right? AI is tangible, real solution that saves lives and makes a real impact in people's path forward. People are talking a lot about the power of generative AI and how creepy it is. Well, hey, I use generative AI every day, like literally every day. We can use AI for modeling, experimentation, to test theories, to test ideas, but we've got to bring it back to the real human touch, right? We got to bring it back to real human behavior. Social media platform for like a Rolodex of your contacts, right? But you can't forego meaningful conversations. Like, let's not be afraid of AI. Let's recognize that it is a narrative and propaganda to help certain actors advance the AI arms race and others get monopolistic competition.
Hey there. Welcome to the Peakality Podcast, your new favorite spot for unlocking the best version of yourself. Ready to level up your life? We've got you. We're all about blending technology with human wisdom and the drive to be better, personally and professionally. Each week, we dig into the real stuff, strategies, tools, and mindsets that cut through the noise and help you thrive. No fluff, just practical insights from experts, thought leaders, and people who've been there, done that. And we're here to break it all down into easy steps. Whether you're kicking off a fresh start or a physician seeking to inspire your patients, we've got stories, tips, and tricks to inspire growth in each area of life. Your peak potential's calling, starting right now. Hit subscribe, join our crew, and let's move forward today. Today on the Peakality Podcast, I am honored to welcome my friend, Dr. Ian McCulloh, to the show. Ian is an associate professor at Johns Hopkins University, where he teaches both the Bloomberg School of Public Health and the Whiting School of Engineering. Ian manages artificial intelligence portfolio within the university's lifelong learning program and leads groundbreaking research in social neuroscience, social network analysis, and AI. He is also the founder of the Brain Rise Foundation, a nonprofit advancing neuroscience and AI research to better equip recovery centers treating substance abuse disorder, PTSD, and mood disorders. Before academia, Ian served 20 years in the U.S. Army, retiring as lieutenant colonel after leading research and strategy for Special Operations, CENTCOM, where he applied social science and data analytics to understand counter-extremism. He later built Accenture's federal AI practice, growing it to over 1,200 scientists and engineers and overseeing 5 of the largest AI programs in the U.S. government. Join me and welcome into the show. In summary, I feel as though that you're saying that really focusing on your, kind of part of the world in which is really trying to help people and make the world a better place. And that's where you see that human connection coming to play with all of these, pieces. Like, as we said, military intelligence, neuroscience, and AI. With those three coming together, you really feel as though that your role in it is just trying to help the world and helping those that want to make a positive change. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We have this, false belief in the myth that like the status quo is okay, right? Like if we look at healthcare, for example, right? The Hippocratic Oath says, do no harm. Well, that creates a status quo bias. And Daniel Kahneman has a great book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, Nobel laureate, and he's done a lot of work on prospect theory and the status quo bias, how we're just, we're more averse to taking risk than we are to doing the kind of safe bet and keeping things what they are. And so what that does is it's not just a matter of it's fine. It's a matter of people die, right? Like I'll give you the example of organ donation, right? So would you be alarmed to know that, about 1 out of every 4 deceased donor organs, kidney organs for transplant is thrown in the trash while over like 10,000 people a year die on the wait list? Right? Is that an okay problem? Are we comfortable with that status quo? Well, when you start boiling it down, it really comes down to an optimism bias. And so what do I mean by optimism bias? Well, we don't, like, a lot of people think that organ donation is we're matching the physiology of this organ with the physiology of this patient, and it's some complex matching algorithm. That's really not what it is at all. It's if you've been on the wait list for a long time, it's your turn. Right? You're going to get the offer first. So if you've been on the wait list for 4 or 5 years, you're getting offers at a much more regular cadence. And so, if a perfectly good median scored organ comes available, do you want a median organ? No, you want to get an A plus sticker star amazing organ because you're at the front of the line and you're getting offers on a regular cadence. So you say no, you say no, you say no. So there becomes a lot of people that have to say no before you get to yes. And so, the UK has like somewhere around a 10 to 12% discard rate, because if you have a 25, a bottom 25%, quality scored organ, they're going to jump the list to somebody that's more likely to offer it. And the criticism they have in the UK is, well, what about the person right ahead of them in line? That's not fair, right? So like, what if we could do something as simple as create a machine learning algorithm to say to the doctors or the patients or the transplant centers, the decision makers, on a little mobile app that says, hey, here's what the mortality slope looks like for your patient with and without this transplant. Here's an estimated time until you are going to get another organ. Or here's a great one. If I say accepting this organ will give your patient 10 more years of life, a certain number will say yes. Same data. If I say refusing this organ will cost your patient 10 more years of life, guess what? A lot more people say yes. They have a lot greater confidence in the decision, and there's a lot greater consensus amongst surgeons that do that. So we launched that, piloted it. We did a study first to see if it moves decision making. We then piloted it in 6 transplant centers, and we went nationwide in 2023. Resulted in probably an estimated 5,000 transplants that otherwise wouldn't have happened. And so, like, this is an example of where, AI is not the boogeyman, right? AI is a tangible, real solution that saves lives and makes a real impact in people's path forward. But the risks of overregulation is not going to stop Russia from using autonomous drones in the kill cycle in Ukraine. It's not going to stop China from basically looking at everything any person in their society does all the time, right? Which, that's their values. That's fine, right? What it is going to do is it's going to prevent us from making the next healthcare innovation, having economic growth. It's going to prevent us from identifying discrimination and inequity and removing it from, systems, all of those sorts of things.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think that is a great example of how you can look at one piece of our world and its inefficiencies, and how we can then make a significant difference in just that piece of the world by and taking lead and making a difference and leveraging, like you said, the technology, and how it's not the boogeyman, but it puts us in an advantage. And if we put restrictions, that's not going to really, our competitors are not putting restrictions on themselves. So why would we need to be at the forefront of those innovations, looking for different pieces in which we can make an impact and in a positive way to change lives. I think that's really, really powerful. And that is definitely the revolution of changing the way that we are working, leading, and even thinking. I mean, you manage major AI programs in federal government and now Johns Hopkins. How do you see the global workforce, over the next decade? I mean, I see a lot of what you're talking about is innovation and people thinking differently. How do you see it overall affecting the overall workforce and how we are working and how we are interacting?
Well, so what I think, in order to understand the impact on the global workforce, I think the first thing we have to understand is, a pragmatic use case. I mean, like, we can look at a lot of areas in problems with organizations adopting AI, and that's a a different discussion. But on the topic of workforce in particular, I think it's important to say, what is the pragmatic use case of AI? Why do we use AI in the first place, right? And to frame that, a favorite example, which you'll appreciate, as an Orlando liver, is Disney World, right? So my favorite demo that I used to love sharing with clients is it was an AI computer vision application. I used to call it "It's a Small World." You can't hide. It's a small world. but it was a computer vision application on the It's a Small World ride at Disney World. So basically what it did is it had an AI system that would look at when the ride operator would step away from the safety controls to help a guest, and it would alert secondary safety to hit stop on the switch, right? Sounds cool, right?
Yep.
Well, here's the problem, right? If you've been on this Small World ride at Disney, it's like a stupid ride, right? You're sitting in a little boat that goes on a track and there's some dolls sing and yell at you, right? It's like, I don't think anybody's been hurt on that ride in the history of Disney World.
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine what conditions would allow somebody to be hurt. So what you've just done is you spent like what? Like, I don't know, $1 million on an AI project that doesn't really improve safety, right?
Yeah.
What is a problem for Disney? Refuse, taking out the trash, right? They spend millions of dollars a day on trash collection. So what about smart sensors on the trash cans so that, you can, instead of having a bunch of sanitation workers, you can have them go to, right, the full trash. Well, guess what happens when they did that? Worker injuries shoot up because instead of having a heavy trash, light, heavy, light, right? It's heavy trash, heavy trash, heavy trash. They have a spike in injuries.
Oh, wow.
Do you abandon the idea? Or do you say, hey, let's double down and let's put in robotic trash compactors and a hydraulic lift so that people aren't getting injured, right? Well, now what have you done? Now you have saved millions of dollars a day in trash and refuse collection, right? While protecting worker safety, right? Because now they don't ever have to take up a heavy trash. And the investment in that has actually made safer working conditions for the employees. And you're actually moving the needle on the ROI. So when we look in general at where we're going to apply AI, right, it just goes back to good old fashioned business operations management, right? You have, everything boils down to throughput, inventory, cost. There's a horrible book, The Goal, right, by Eli Goldratt. And I just say, it's a rough read. It's a rough read, but it's presented as a novel where this guy is just taken over leadership of a manufacturing plant that's not going very well, and his marriage isn't going well, and he's a horrible parent, and he sucks as a Boy Scout troop leader, and everything in his life is array, right? Can we relate, right? And then his mentor, who's a physicist. Not that physics has anything to do with this. I think Eli Goldratt was a physicist, so he made the mentor, the wise guy. I meant a physicist, right? But he basically tells him everything in life boils down to three things: throughput, inventory, and cost. And he uses an example of like, hey, you're not going to make the campsite with your Boy Scout troop in time because you have some slow troops. But if you treat the space between them on the trail as inventory and you reorder the marching order of the troops, right, and you can reduce that inventory, then you'll actually meet the campsite on time. And he makes all these analogies for different walks of life, which is the brilliance of the book. But when I think about it for AI, the real challenge is, where are we going to deploy AI to solve a pragmatic problem, right? Where do we deploy AI so that instead of making perfectly safe rides not much safer, we're taking out the trash, right?
Yes.
And it really comes into, cost in terms of labor is possibly one of the most myopic use cases of AI. Why are we not thinking about AI to do better at managing inventory or managing, an inventory could be customer backlog, right? Does anybody want to wait forever to get a hold of their call center or their, the customer service? Like we have these like liquid expectations where if we can order something from Amazon before we start this podcast and it's waiting at a doorstep when we're done, we want that everywhere. So like there's a huge cost in market share if you can't manage backlog of customers, if you can't manage inventory costs in your supply chain to get products to consumers in a quick way. What about throughput or growth, right? Are we producing more? Are we serving more people? And it's this value, right, that means that we're not in a status quo environment, right? So putting AI doesn't mean we go in at the status quo and the way things are today are just fine and we're going to lower our costs and we're going to do it cheaper and forget about that guy, right? What the promise of AI is we can actually do more better. We can improve, we can live a better society. We can't do that today because we don't have the labor force to do it. But with AI, we actually can achieve that promise, right? We can get better health outcomes. We can get more convenience. We can automate away unsafe or, and so then, the remaining question then is the rate at which we make those advances and how disruptive is that to the labor market of today?
in speaking of the labor market today, what do you feel as though that people should be what skills should people be learning today to think differently or to do differently? I mean, it is the whole analogy of going from, let's say, the steamboat engine to, something that's a different, more efficient, whether it's, you know, um, nuclear or electric or, gas or whatever. I mean, you're converting one old technology, it seems as though that you're saying, into a newer technology. What skills do you think that people need to be learning for that future? What is that labor skill that people should be focusing on?
Well, I mean, I think that there is a certain amount of technological literacy, which isn't surprising for people. Like I think my parents had a single phone with a cord in the household well into like the late 90s, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like my mother is just turned 90. She has a cell phone, but she doesn't have a computer, she does everything on her phone, you know what I mean? But that requires a certain level of sophistication. My father, passed away a number of years ago, and I don't know that he ever had a cell phone. I don't know that that was ever a thing, right? So, like, that seems crazy to us, but like, put yourself back to the 60s and 70s, right? Like, the automatic door at the supermarket is a classic definition of AI. It senses you're coming to the store, it reasons you want to get inside, it opens the door for you, it senses, reasons, and acts, right? That's very rudimentary AI. My wife refuses to believe that that's AI today. She's like, it's not learning, it's not getting any better. And I'm like, because it's machine working, it's not machine learning. But she doesn't even like that joke. Like the technology of yesterday is ubiquitous today. So there is going to be a natural evolution of that. But when it comes to what you as an individual should do, it depends on your passions, right? It used to be that when people were in advertising and marketing, I know you have a long marketing and advertising background, Courtney. Like it used to be that people had to go and get a paintbrush out and paint the picture. And the idea of copying that to another thing, and you didn't have to go ad by ad to print it out, was revolutionary, right? And did that disemploy a bunch of painters? Maybe, probably, right? But what did they learn to do? My daughter, who's turns 26 here next week, right? She When she went to college, she learned how to use Adobe Acrobat Studio, and she learned how to use graphic arts tools and stuff like that for marketing and advertising. So did that displace people in the creative industries? No. you know, People are talking a lot about the power of generative AI and how creepy it is. Well, hey, I use generative AI every day, like literally every day, even on Sundays, which I probably am trying to maybe shouldn't do that, right? But but like what we find is generative AI is very good at summarizing and taking existing knowledge, right? It can survey the totality of human knowledge, which you may not have, and it appears to be innovative. But when you start at the cutting edge, it's not really that innovative. I'll give you an example. A number of years ago for FEMA, we were building an application. This is right before COVID. We were building an application to estimate the impact of natural disasters for fraud and loss prevention. So the idea is, hey, there's a natural disaster, a hurricane. Everybody says, yeah, my house is ruined. And, they say, yeah, my $300,000 house is really worth $1 million. Here's my claim, right? And how do you actually estimate what that is? So we thought, what we can do is we could maybe pull data from Zillow, and we could use that to get rough estimates of the housing areas in different regions. And then maybe we could, add supplemental data. That was just an example of one data point. We had multiple data points to kind of estimate the impact of loss, right? And that was fine. Fast forward a few years, I'm getting ready to move and buy a new house. I'm like, hey, I wonder if I could just remember how to pull that API to get the Zillow data, and I'll find out an undervalued house and I'll get a good deal, right? Well, they changed the API. Of course they changed the API, right? That's their value proposition. They make money off of their data. They don't want to just give it away to a guy like me, right? So there's this cat and mouse game. Generative AI is not good at all at innovating the cat and mouse game. And eventually, my wife was irritated that I was spending the better part of a day doing this, and she told me she can just freaking look at it herself and get better information, and that was true. But my point is, and there's countless other examples, just my point is that when you're trying to do something truly innovative, right, next level, generative AI has no ability to really ideate or be creative like that.
Mm.
What it's really doing is it's finding ways to aggregate, synthesize. So if you think of innovation from the perspective of, hey, I'm going to take this idea over here in a domain I haven't heard of before and bring it here, great. It'll be very good at that because it can make those connections and can bring it in there. But when it comes to saying, hey, somebody is actively trying to be clever at preventing me from doing something, and I need to be more innovative to get beyond that, or I need to really do the next push, not a great use of generative AI.
I mean, it's really not bringing in the creativity. That's where the human intelligence with AI tool being an aggregate, I mean, you are leveraging your creativity with the understanding of efficiency of an aggregate tool, bringing in past understandings into one place. So I think that that's a really great way for us to understand the strengths that we have versus AI and how we can better positions ourselves. I mean, and you've also been kind of switching gears a little bit. I mean, you've been one of the pioneers in social network analysis and understand how the structure of human networks, help us improve performance, collaboration, recovery, and outcomes. How do you see that moving forward? I mean, how do you see the structure and how can we look at the help us improve in those areas with performance, collaboration, and recovery?
I love that. I would tell you that there's a couple different perspectives that I can respond to that on. First, I think we need to understand that people need connection with others, right? Like, I don't know, if I may indulge in a religious example, is, if you go back to the book of Genesis, right? There's three things we see about man in the first book of Genesis, right? So the first thing is when God made man, right? He observed it is not good for man to be alone,
Mm.
right? So that was one. The other thing is he gave Adam a job. People think, that was the result of sin. It actually came before sin, right? It was like, should not be alone. You need to have something to do. And then the third thing is there was a rule. Don't eat the apple, right? And I think those three things, right, regardless of your religious beliefs, sum the essence of humans' most basic needs. We need purpose, we need social acceptance, and we need, control, I call it, but it's Merton's idea of anomie. It's right when you have a loosening set of social norms and values, right? Any of those three things, when they're in their disarray, your level of social anxiety goes up or social strain goes up. And it puts you in a place where you're looking for alternatives. Your life is not working out when you lack those three things. So these are the most basic needs. So when we go to the idea of social acceptance or social connection in particular, right, we have this strong biological drive and draw to others. We need that connection. And what's happening is, it used to be, when I was a kid, you moved. Like when I joined the military and I left college, it's like I didn't really have a way. I had a few phone numbers to go and try and call a friend from college, but like really, I didn't see them regularly, right? Like I went to, I was in the Army, so I went to a new unit. I met the people I knew at work, right? That's not the case today, right? Our kids, right? They are still connected on social media with people they met in middle school, right? And they have all these pockets. And there is a certain level of time and effort to maintain some of those relationships, if you will. And these social media platforms have really kind of created efficiencies to try and maintain like shallow relationships with many people, right? And that's a huge time and cost suck for people to do that if they do that. And I think it contributes to a mental health toll on them. You actually add the fact that early social media, where it's like direct messaging and posts, right? It adds this other component of vitriol where people are kind of like negative towards others, which contributes to mental health issues, which in one of my papers a couple years ago, we actually found that different dynamics with Instagram and TikTok when people are doing kind of disparaging, silly reels, right? There's less bullying online. It's almost fun to be the butt of the joke, right? So that has actually lessened some of the mental health issues that you observe for people online. But so you have that. The other thing that you see with a lot of social media is covet envy magnet. You know what I mean? Like it's not like anybody says, you know what? I have a really hard day. Hey, my kids are driving now, and I'm afraid of what they're going to do. Right? They're horrible drivers. Like nobody says that online. What they show is you see somebody post a picture of the new car that they can't afford, that they got their kid, and now you feel you have to keep up with the Joneses, or you're not good enough, right?
Yeah.
All of these things is this layer of artificiality. And because we're spending so much time managing the online, what do we not do? We don't actually form meaningful relationships with people that we talk to about what matters.
Yes.
And I think that is contributing to a growing epidemic of loneliness and
Yeah.
isolation. And
Yeah.
it becomes more and more difficult to make friends and connect with people in meaningful ways as you age.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of those relationships are very surface. I mean, you look at the people that are making themselves very plastic looking, and those relationships are very shallow and plastic themselves. And same with people that are having mental health issues, they're not having relationships with people of depth. They're also same thing with the AI tools. I mean, with healthcare, a lot of people are turning to healthcare solutions that are AI as well. I mean, how do you see people being able to leverage AI tools to come together for meaningful relationships and having that depth versus having surface relationships, not just with surface people, but then also surface technology? How do you see that bridge coming together so that you see people actually building substantial relationships with one another?
What you make me think about there is the very first chatbot that was ever created was Eliza. I think it was came out in 1966, right? Which I think is funny. Like I went to the doctor last month, and I must have been wearing a Johns Hopkins shirt. And he's like, "Oh, are you a professor?" Because I guess I don't look like I could be a student. And he says, and I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "What are you a professor of?" And I said, "AI." And he goes, "Oh, what'd you do before?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, AI is kind of new, right?" And I'm like,
Oh my God.
um, well,
It
the
is
neural
new
network
for
was
so many.
actually the neural network was published in 1943, and he goes, "Oh, I guess it's not that new." I'm like, "Yeah, not that new." But uh, anyway, the early chatbot Eliza, right? They had a therapist, right? An AI therapist. That was the first chatbot, one of the early AI applications. And they also made, I forget the name of it, but there was an AI schizophrenic, and everybody thinks, "Oh, that's kind of funny." So the AI counselor counsels the schizophrenic. That's silly, and it's not silly. What it was doing is it's like, how do you do actual empirical randomized controlled trials for research on counseling strategies and theories for how to help people?
Mm.
You can't just do that on people. What about the potential for harm? And like what people don't understand in statistics is a lot of times you have to get the data points on things you know won't work so you can map out the surface and understand how different levers work together in complex ways, especially in counseling. So it was actually a brilliant innovation if you use it for understanding counseling strategies, and you let a counselor say, "I think this might be a better strategy," and then you can execute it on AI.
Mhm.
Because if it hurt the AI, stop, reset, do it again, right? And then translate that to actual human touch, right? Like that would be a good use case. What people have done now is they are kind of resorting to self-counseling directly on the chatbot because they haven't thought through the whole process. Like, it's interesting in the origin of AI, right? They usually trace the concept back to the Dartmouth Conference of 1956. But the two guys that coined the term were two Nobel laureates, Herb Simon and Alan Newell, who were at Carnegie Tech at the time. It was before Carnegie Mellon. And what's interesting is there was a third guy that was hanging around with them, Harrison White, who was a physicist. Herb Simon and Alan Newell was an economist and a psychologist, right? Artificial intelligence began as a social science to help think about human behavior. How do we test human behavior? It really stemmed from in World War II, they observed that some military leaders prevailed over opponents that were better resourced and better equipped. And there's something about the science of decision making and learning that we can understand. These were the early applications. So as a physicist, Harrison wasn't really qualified to do the work. So he left his tenure track faculty position at Carnegie Tech, went and got a second PhD in sociology at Princeton, and went to Harvard and founded the mathematical sociology program, right? And, like had a couple, like two of his notable students that came out of that program that went back to work with Herb Simon and Alan Newell is Kathleen Carley and Dave Crackhart. Kathleen was my PhD advisor, and I TA'd for David, who they were great. My point in this is when you're talking about what does this mean for mental health, right? We can use AI for modeling, experimentation, to test theories, to test ideas, but we've got to bring it back to the real human touch, right? We got to bring it back to real human behavior. It's great to maintain a social media platform for like a Rolodex of your contacts, right? But you can't forego meaningful conversations. And it's really this idea of, there's a lot of different analogies for it. They're like, how many seats do you have at your table is one example, or how much space do you have for others is another example. And we know that there's certain cognitive limits on that, right? We know that, for close, intimate friendships, your limit is about 6, right? 6 people is all you can have that really kind of know your soul and know each other, right? When you're talking about weekly friends that you see every week that you're in a group with, right, that you're checking in with, that's about 18. When you're talking about people that you know and can access for knowledge and resources when you need to, that's about 150. That's why organizations that exceed 150 have to start getting organizational, they have to have an HR department and an ops and a sales and a whatever, because you got to help people find those knowledge and resources in the organization when they need them, right? So that's the problem. And what I think is people exceed the capacity. Like if you were to count up how many really, really close friends that you really have an intimate relationship, you add your spouse, you add your kids, you add your family member, like how much room do you have left, right? Throw a best, like how many best friends do you have? When you start looking at who you're touching weekly contacts with, right? Like that list quickly exceeds 18. And, if I were to, throw one more biblical example, because it's just been on my mind lately, is I came across, I think it's Jennifer McCulloh did an interesting paper on the social network of Jesus, right? But what I looked at, when I looked at the numbers, the biblical example of this idea of capacity, it's a 2/3 rule, right? So Jesus didn't have 6 close friends. He had James, John, and Peter, right? There were 4 of them, 2/3 of 6. He didn't have 18 disciples. He had 12, 2/3 of 18. When you look at how military companies were organized in the Old Testament, it wasn't companies of 150 like we have today. It was companies of 100, right? And so what is that capacity? Well, the capacity allows you the space to respond in meaningful ways. My favorite social psychology experiment lately is this one that was done in the 70s at a Jesuit seminary, where you're going to laugh at this, right? But like priests were basically told they have to go give a sermon on the Good Samaritan. For those that aren't like familiar with the Bible, right? The Good Samaritan is a guy that was beat up, and 2 religious priests or good people like walked by him, went on the other side of the street to walk around him, and then like kind of like the scourge of the society, like the mean guy or whatever the people looked down on. He went, helped the guy, took him to an inn, paid for his hotel, whatever, and he said, "Who is your neighbor?" Right? Is it the priest or is it the guy that like helped him, right? So these priests are going to go give a sermon on that story, and they made half of them late and the other half had plenty of time. So the priests that were late to give their sermon, and then they would have an actor along the way that act like he was hurt and needed help. And the priests that were late would walk around him so that they could be on time to give a sermon on the Good Samaritan, that story. The priests that had plenty of time would stop and help them. And I think the lesson that we take away from that is when we overbook our calendar and we have absolutely no capacity, right? Capacity in our relationships, capacity in our calendar choices for how much time we book up with everything, just capacity in the activities we schedule our kids for. When we schedule everything to every nth minute and we have no capacity, we don't have the ability to have human connection. And the result in that is increasing loneliness, is increasing, worsening mental health conditions. And then how do we make that up? Do we do a quick fix and soothe with some sort of other substance? Do we just sit in despair? Do we go on to other destructive alternatives on social media because it's artificial and it feels like it's filling that hole, but it's really not? And where does that lead?
I feel like I could talk to you for hours just about so many of these layers that you've touched base on. And we're kind of getting close on time. If you were just to leave everyone with one piece of advice with your experience with where you feel as though the world is today, if you were to talk to leaders, people that really want to go into 2026 with knowing that, despite the uncertainty, recognizing where technology is, and they want to feel as though that they are leading their teams themselves with clarity, what is one piece of advice that you would give people kind of wanting to step into the new year with a positive outlook for themselves and their teams?
If I were to just kind of put a thread through everything that you've kind of led this discussion on, is, I would begin with saying that, you know, AI is not a scary boogeyman,
Mm.
but that is an active propaganda narrative that is being pushed in our culture today, right? And AI is not the boogeyman that's going to take away people's jobs and harm people and turn into Terminator and Skynet. AI is a powerful tool that has been around for 75, 80 years and has built, really helped us grow into a more comfortable, more safer, more prosperous, and society with longer health outcomes for people. And it still continues to hold that progress at even greater and greater rates, right? So, like, let's not be afraid of AI. Let's recognize that it is a narrative and propaganda to help certain actors advance the AI arms race and others get monopolistic competition. But we should be looking at it as a way to make our world better. The real scary thing is the status quo bias and the idea that AI has to be perfect instead of just has to be better. And if we can approach it with, I like to call it the burn test after one of my colleagues here at Hopkins, right, where he says it's really easy to see if AI does what it's supposed to do and doesn't have a side effect. It's called the randomized controlled trial. We've been doing it for decades with pharmaceuticals, right? We know how to test and evaluate outcomes, right? This is what we need to be doing. That leads into, well, doing it on what? And really, AI failure is not failure of the technology, it's a failure of the use case and the leadership. You see, AI is not something you go and buy, it's something you lead. And the first part of leadership is understanding what is it you're trying to do? Where are your pain points, right? Where are your bottlenecks in process? And can you choose the best areas in which to apply AI? If you select a good pain point, the AI will make it better and you'll have a return on investment, and it's fairly straightforward. The problem is not that the AI doesn't work. The problem is that the business leader doesn't know well enough what's going on in his organization to pick the right use case, right? Are you taking out the trash, or are you trying to just make perfectly safe rides just not that much safer, right? And then that leads to, well, what does that mean for the workforce? Well, if leaders, which I haven't seen empirical evidence to suggest this is true, but if leaders could actually understand and figure out what's going on in their business, right, there would be huge labor disruption. And yeah, we need to really think about that. But let's go back to Einstein, who I think lived and died well before AI came around. And he said if he had an hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes understanding the problem and 5 minutes actually solving it. What that tells me is for centuries, the big problem has been, do people know enough about the problems they're trying to solve? Have they understood the problem? Can they direct resources effectively? The answer to that is still no.
Mm.
Still no. So the bigger issue is not about labor disruption or Skynet from Terminator, or like the world's going to come to an end, or there's going to be artificial superintelligence that's going to destroy mankind, right? The real issue is, are people going to take the time and convenience that AI affords to think and understand problems, or are they going to go kick back on the beach with a cocktail?
Yeah.
Either one's fine, right?
Sure.
Either one's fine.
Each his own.
But hey, you can draw your own conclusions from that statement.
It's amazing. This is wonderful. I know you need to go. So thank you so much for your time. If people want to get a hold of you, how best should they reach out to you?
They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm not that responsive because I'm getting more and more comments from LinkedIn, but that's probably the best way to reach out to me, or they can talk to you and you can put them through.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate it and look forward to talking soon.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Thanks. Take care. Bye.